So I've honestly been really excited to talk about Dandadan again. I've done one video on it, kind of more so linking it with Chainsaw Man, hopefully to bring it a little bit more exposure for people that weren't really sure about it. But now I want to give it its own separate slot, basically. And now that it has 20 odd chapters, a decent portion of material to go through, and a better understanding of what the flow of the story is like, its introduction to characters and everything in between, now's a good time to do so. However, I do want to provide a bit of context for this series for people that are brand new to it, don't know anything about it, or are genuinely rather confused. There is a bit of valuable history with this author, considering I believe this is their first work, how successful it currently is, and where this author actually comes from. See, you may read Dandadan and come to the realization that it feels familiar in certain aspects, maybe characters, maybe the chaotic craziness that it brings across, or maybe how certain things are depicted artistically. This is because the author used to be an assistant to Fujimoto, who is the author of Fire Punch and Chainsaw Man. Dandadan's author worked on Fire Punch, Chainsaw Man, and I believe also Hell's Paradise. And they've brought all of this knowledge and experience from working on those series and has built it into their own thing, which is incredible to see. Because of this experience, Dandadan actually has a lot of exposure. Not only does Fujimoto himself promote the series quite regularly alongside the Hell's Paradise author, it would seem that it's attracted the same pool of audience that Chainsaw Man fans circle around. And this comes in the form of its sales and the amount of copies it actually has in circulation. For one singular volume, having over 200,000 copies in circulation is an incredible number, and I believe it sold around 70 to 80,000. Now this is extremely good, this is extremely successful, and I can give you kind of a brief comparison, and this isn't to devalue other series, but a Weekly Shonen Jump story, which is the most popular magazine, selling 80,000 copies within its first 100 chapters is a little bit rare. It's not unheard of, but that is definitely on the spectrum of being rather successful. I believe Mashle is currently the only series that has 70 odd chapters and 7 volumes that sells around about that amount. And that's a great thing for Mashle, but obviously there's a bit of a jarring difference between that series and Dandadan, especially with where it's published. With Weekly Shonen Jump being the most prominent magazine, having all of the eyes on it, the most successful, Mashle having 7 volumes already, it's gained quite a bit of traction, its own audience, and it's doing well in its own department. Dandadan, on the other hand, has 1 volume, has 20 chapters, is not physically released in a physical magazine compared to Weekly Shonen Jump, and is on a completely different site that is digital only. So as much as this is a loose comparison in success, it's not meant to devalue any other series, but to showcase how well Dandadan is actually doing within Jump Plus, and selling its first volume extremely well, which I'm more than happy to see. I'm very glad that the reception towards Dandadan is so high, because it's great to see kind of controlled, chaotic storytelling be successful, be enjoyable, be indulged with by a massive group of people, by an ever-growing audience. And the more that it's channeling and tapping into Chainsaw Man's audience, into potentially Hell's Paradise's audience, the more that it thrives on its own regard. While obviously those two series prop it up rather heavily, it does stand on its own 2 feet extremely well. It pays homage to Chainsaw Man, to Hell's Paradise, to the series that the author used to work on for the people that he worked with. So there's a little bit of its recent success and a little bit of a backstory for the author and the series in itself. What about the future? What is the story truly like to read? What is the experience that it brings across? First and foremost, this series is actually getting an official English release, which makes me inherently happy. Because originally I didn't think it was. I thought it was going to be one of those successful Japanese manga that never gets an English release. But because there was so much want for this series outside of Japan, they made it happen. So already I believe it has an official Spanish release, if that is a language you're comfortable with reading, and you can read it for free in its entirety in Japanese or Spanish on their own Jump websites. You'll have to wait a little bit longer for the English release. I'm not entirely sure when it's coming out. Supposedly it was this month, and then someone said September, but then more so just the end of the year. We're definitely getting an English release this year, and I believe it's going to be releasing weekly in English alongside the Japanese release as well, which is very progressive. It's very great to hear. The story, however, I was wrong about originally. This isn't just a chaotic, wild, comedic-filled storytelling experience. That is what it portrays itself to be, and that is what 70 to 80% of the story actually is. Don't get me wrong, there's a lot of valuable stuff surrounding that chaotic nature. And while it can be very unpredictable, and while you can get lost and thrown all over the place, if you manage to kind of stick with the ride, with the experience, it will give you something very valuable. However, you won't actually see it till more so around about the 14th chapter, all the way up to its 20th. There is a very small specific arc that is genuinely important in showing a different side of Dandadan's storytelling experience, one that you don't see at the beginning. You can pull it apart at the beginning underneath the surface, but it doesn't show its head more clearly till much later on. And that's going to be the hardest hurdle for people to jump over, because if you're not into chaotic storytelling, if you're not into the wild, uncontrolled experience that throws everything at you, it's going to be difficult to get through the first portion of this series. It's going to be difficult to get to that 14th chapter mark to experience the different side, the more emotional storytelling that comes from this author. One that is handled very beautifully for how much time and emphasis it puts into a backstory, into making you feel for very disgustingly dangerous individuals, curses or spirits or aliens that have warped backstories or paths that have been convoluted by so much hatred and deep-rooted emotion. When you draw all of that out and show it within only 5 chapters, it sounds extremely rushed, but with how Dandadan does it, it's beautiful. It's borderline poetic. It's straight to the point, but being able to weaponize it so well, which enhances the overall experience, which makes this emotion flourish and bloom in such a beautiful way that makes you see the story entirely different to what it was only a handful of chapters ago, is a very impressive thing to do, especially so early within your story. This makes me inherently excited to see what Dandadan does, and with more time and more emphasis on characters and their backstories and building a bigger experience, a bigger arc, a bigger dialogue, it has so much at its disposal. Because there's so much finesse on handling deep-rooted emotions and bringing that across to readers, that translates over to its chaoticness. And already you start to see the wild throwing of every single object, character, thing, or idea that you have come across already start to be reduced, start to be picked and choose to be showcased in a very specific way, to paint specific pictures, to give the result of loose understandings. You will not see this nor experience it within the first 10 chapters. And don't get me wrong, the first 10 chapters are incredible, they're just a wild fun ride. But for the people that dislike it, for the people that aren't really into the whole chaotic storytelling, I promise you when you get past those 10 chapters and get to more of this emotional stuff and catch up to the more recent chapters, you will see a lot more of that finesse come through. Things will be a lot more clear. But do be aware this story is told in a way that is surrounding chaos. It will throw a lot of things at you. It's very much up in your face with comedy, with character interaction, with how quick they jump between different things. But for when it does want to slow itself down and focus on the moments that matter, focus on the heartbeat of the storytelling experience that is Dandadan, it will give you the purest form of it in all the right ways. That I can guarantee you. Originally, this video wasn't going to be anything like this, but after I reread through the whole thing and caught up with all of the recent chapters, I was more than surprised with how it double backed on itself and elevated to something else entirely. It's almost like it done a complete 180 to what it was trying to get you used to, which was this relentless throwing everything at you experience, which isn't bad in its own right, but instead it turned around, it made you stop and breathe for a second and show a different side that you haven't seen yet. It was simple, it was straight to the point, but it was handled with so much care and finesse and made you feel for a being that looked so scary and horrifying, but had so much beauty behind it. How that came to a conclusion was magnificent. It honestly reminded me a portion of Chainsaw Man's experience, and I hate to bridge the connection or have some sort of comparison within there, but that's the best way to explain it. At first I was worried that this story would be heavily overlooked, that people would read the first and second chapter and kind of feel comfortable in saying that it isn't for them because of how much is thrown at them, and honestly I can't blame you for that. There is a lot thrown at you. It is very chaotic, it is very wild. But with how much I've reiterated those exact same words, I'm more than surprised with how much it's changed in such a short amount of time. And I strongly recommend that if you find yourself sitting in that prior category where you really don't think you'd like it just because of how wild of an experience it can be and you want something that's a little bit more focused, try reading the first 20 chapters, catching up to the more emotional moment where it actually changes and shows you a different face of Dandadan's story, and then make your decision. You may change it completely or you may still sit comfortably in your result. Either way, I do believe experiencing the first 20 chapters of Dandadan is the best example of what the story actually is. How it can jump between so many different emotions and so many different experiences that twist and rotate and kind of couple together rather beautifully. Going from those high octane moments to the slower, methodical, emotional beats in between. It makes me ever more excited to see how they're drawn out into something a lot more long term. Not to mention just building upon the really lovable cast of characters is always great to see. Momo is such an incredible, endearing and progressive female protagonist, someone that steals the spotlight constantly. And while her companion and the co-protagonist, if you will, Ken, is the complete opposite of her and plays kind of like the other side of the coin, he too holds the spotlight in his own right. They work together extremely well and have this beautiful combination between them, but even on their own they excel. They bring very enjoyable moments for you to indulge within. All in all, if there is one thing to take from this video other than my love and appreciation and how I was wrong about Dandadan's kind of experience, is that I would love for you to try and read it again, and at least try and read 20 chapters of it, even if you don't really enjoy it, just to see its full value, to see what it's offering on the other side of that chaotic wild nature. I am positive a massive portion of you will see it entirely differently, and hopefully, in due time, fall in love with it, like I definitely did. So with that being said, that is basically it. If you have read Dandadan, let me know how you feel about it. I'm sure a lot of people have some very interesting interpretations of the story with what it wants to tell, mixing aliens and spirits and curses and folklore alike, and how two characters are inherently connected to both of them. I'd love to hear your thoughts. But with all of that, I want to thank you all for watching. Leave a like and subscribe if you enjoyed. I greatly appreciate it. Drink plenty of water. New video every 3 days, and I will see you within the next one. Goodbye.